Hey, what up squad? In this episode, we're going to be running into ants and more water damage. Now let's get this thing started. Now if you're new to the series, guys, the overall goal is really to replace that old nasty carpet with some sexy ass new vinyl. But while we're at it, since everything's going to be opened up anyways, we're gonna lay down some sound deadeners. So in the last episode, guys, we removed all of that nasty old carpeting as well as performed which was essentially truck surgery. We got rid of all of the really rotted out metal and cleaned up as much of the good metal as we can. And in this episode, we're gonna start laying down some sound deadeners, but not without issues. And with that, let's get to the truck. Now let's start laying down some sound deadeners here, guys. There's a little bit of dust and some grease, so we'll definitely have to wipe it down with alcohol first. And it will be a little bit tedious. I mean, if you've seen my previous sound deadener for the ceiling, all it really is just laying down the pieces of the sound deadener in a strategic manner so you're not having too much waste. So we'll start this side, clean it up, and then start laying the stuff down. Starting at a corner and doing a little bit at a time is definitely the best way to start this work. Alright guys, as you can see, this area has pretty much dried and it's ready for paint. So now let's get to painting. So here's what the footwell area looks like now, guys. It looks pretty good so far. Yes, there's definitely brush streaks on there, but we are laying down some sound deadeners on here once we patch up that hole. And I also did put about 2 layers of paint on here in order to keep that metal as protected as possible. So it does look rough, but it doesn't matter since sound deadeners are going on there. And what's nice about that primer is we know exactly which areas we've missed when it comes to painting. So I did lay some paint down on these areas that was primed earlier. And same thing with these areas on the passenger side. This repair is definitely progressing pretty well so far. This paint will definitely take overnight to fully cure and harden. So in the meantime, we can keep laying down these sound deadeners. Here's the passenger side footwell. We got 95% of it covered. Same thing with the overall passenger side. It definitely looks great so far. So here's a quick comparison with the sound deadener on most of the flooring. So just a couple things I want to mention, guys. This type of job, putting down sound deadeners, really is low skill, pretty easy job. All it requires really is just cutting basically gigantic stickers and then laying them down flat and making sure that the surface is cleaned with alcohol prior to installing these mats. Now, I did not install any sound deadeners on this general area. I'm actually planning on cutting this bracket off. This is where the hydraulic jack sits. I'm going to use it as a different space. So I am planning on doing some type of my own version of the goose gear platform on this general area. So I'm also not putting in the plastic inserts that basically becomes the storage bins for the rear section here. Some of the future ideas too would probably include relocating that tank, maybe put that tank under here and then route some of the plumbing so that we can have a bulkhead fitting up against here, so it's easier to connect the air inflator instead of going and climbing and connect it up top there. So we'll see. I have to think about it and plan it out a little bit more, but for now we'll keep this area open for future improvements. So the driver's side has also been mostly done, maybe about 60%. I only covered under the driver side seat because the paint itself still needs to cure, but pretty much the back and the passenger side is done. So now we'll have to cut a piece of sheet metal to cover up that hole and also prep it so we can just rivet it once everything's fully cured on the surface here. So we got this piece of sheet metal, guys. I think this is like a 14 gauge, I forget. This is roughly the same thickness as the foot pan, so I already have it marked with a blue marker. We're gonna cut a 8x11 piece off of it and then just shape it so that it fits fairly well in that general area. Let's see how this covers, guys. Oh yeah, that definitely gives a roughly about a 1 inch or so overlap among all sides. But yeah, that definitely covers that area. Probably shape it a little bit, throw a curve on there. Oh yeah, look at that. So that should fit fairly well. I'll just carefully massage it so that we can get it to shape exactly the way we want. I think that's actually like perfect right there, guys. Yeah, so we'll also prime and paint this and then rivet it right onto that hole. So we got our sheet metal here now, guys, and I'm just gonna hold the corners. I did build this jig with nails underneath it, just 3 nails, so that I can paint both sides of this piece of metal without having to wait too long in between coating. And yes, it's going to poke 3 different areas, but it's okay. I'm just gonna keep laying paint on top of it, so it's better to do this quickly anyway. So we're going to prime this and then paint it, and then get this thing ready for tomorrow, because we definitely want to be able to have all the paint cured by tomorrow so we can finish up this repair.
As I mentioned in the last video, guys, I bought this truck back in March 2016, knowing it had already been into an accident. But later on, at around June 2019 timeframe, that's when I found out that the quality of repair wasn't actually that good. So I fixed up everything that I can at the time, thinking it would be good after sealing up all the holes that I did find. My previous repair didn't hold, and water was still coming from somewhere, so it was really time to do some testing to see where this water was intruding into that driver's side foot pan. And with that, let's get back to the truck.
I took this hose, I ran this hose up here, and I had water showering through. And when I ran the water through, it actually started leaking behind the seal here on the firewall. So I'll actually have to remove that fender, and I'll run the water so you guys can see that real quick. Water coming through.
Oh yeah, over there.
Yeah, I don't know if you see that, guys, but see that water coming through right there. So I'll definitely have to take off the fender to see where this whole thing's coming from, because it looks like it's sealed back here. So there might be a pinhole from the opposite end of it that's allowing water to pool up and seep through.
Now it was time to do some physical inspection behind that front driver fender. First, we removed the fender flares by undoing all the 10mm screws underneath. Then it should pop right out. The nylon plastic anchors holding the wheel well liner and the fender was stuck together, so I just kept them together during this removal. There are 2 10mm bolts and 2 10mm nuts that hold the lower front end of the fender. You'll see a better shot when we perform the installation in one of the next episodes of the series.
And there's more 10mm bolts along the top of the fender that we'll have to undo.
There are more 10mm bolts along the rear. This last one is accessed by opening the front door partially.
Alright guys, so as you can see, this area under the fender has a little bit of rust to it as well. So we'll also prime that. And it looks like the area under the cowl is also clogged with so much crud. We'll clean that up as well. And the water should be draining downwards here, so I think it's somehow penetrating under this general area. It looks like these cutouts are supposed to allow the water to basically drain completely, and I think it might just be piling up and then draining where it's not supposed to be draining.
Yeah, this is definitely what happens when you live in the Garden State and you live around trees. I'll definitely have to open up the passenger side as well to check it out at some point.
Shit guys, looks like there's a fucking ant colony under there. Jesus, that's crazy.
Now I just want to add guys, I don't daily my truck. And since I do go on several work trips during the year, my truck can be parked a few weeks at a time. That's definitely how it happened. But anyways, cleaning this up was pretty disgusting. I did dig out the area using the screwdriver and sucked everything out with my shop vac. As I was doing so, the ants were definitely panicking and would jump out at me. Some ended up on my legs and some ended up on my arms. Hopefully you guys don't have to go through this.
So here's a couple more problems that we found guys after vacuuming up that ant colony. The body shop that performed this repair did a half-assed job. This hole is supposed to be for a rivet, and this hole goes all the way through to the footwell, and it hasn't been patched, and it looks exactly like this. So all the water that runs down will penetrate through that hole. So here's the other problem. I've been digging out all the seam seal that covered this whole area here because I was testing the water penetration, and water would still go through here even though there was a thick layer of seam seal. So I just went and started digging that seam seal out, and you can see by the rust on this metal that the seam seal was actually not adhered properly onto that metal. So water would seep through the seam seal, because when I was cutting it out, parts of the seam seal wasn't exactly flat, and water was able to make itself all the way through underneath the seam seal and into the bare metal. And looking further down, you'll see right there in the middle of the screen, that's a hole guys. And that hole also goes right to the footwell. Not good. Another nice little surprise from poor repair. So that's what we got. Right now I'm using a flathead screwdriver to dig out as much of that old seam seal so we can at least clean up the metal and put a much better layer of seam seal on there.
Just to add a little bit more information too guys, when I was digging out some of the old seam seal, I found a couple of ants underneath it. So I can only speculate that the ants also did try to bury underneath that soft seam seal, which probably caused some of the leaking.
So here's the plan guys. I've already dug out as much of the old seam sealer as I can that had the leak, which allowed the water to penetrate through to the footwell. So I'm going to apply some rust converter in those really hard rusted areas. And we'll really try to prep those areas as best as we can for the seam sealer. So as you guys can see, that rust layer has turned to that black oxide. So now we can clean this whole area up with acetone and apply our primer. Yeah, this isn't exactly the ideal circumstance, for applying primer, guys. Everything's kind of tight in this general area, but we'll do our best to clean it and seal up all those holes.
The next day.
So here's where we are now, guys. The primer has fully cured, and now we can definitely apply some of the seam sealer and seal up all those holes. Now I'll be sealing up this hole with seam sealer and also riveting it in place so that this clamps it together. So that looks great now, guys. I did use my glove to flatten out the thicker layer and have it pretty much as leveled as I can. But after this thing has cured, we'll also reprime it and paint over the whole thing. And I also did rivet that and then pushed all the caulking around it so that that rivet is also water sealed.
So that's where we're going to end this episode, guys. Vacuuming up that whole ant colony was pretty disgusting. And I still can't believe I had a whole terrarium in my Fender frame there. But anyways, we keep pressing forward with this repair, and hopefully you guys learned something from this process too. So with that, make sure you smash that like, subscribe, and hit that bell too while you're at it. And until next time, peace out everybody.